Hello there, and thanks for joining our session today on Reframing with Design Thinking here at the Can Do Innovation Summit 2022, where our inspirational panel of experts will discuss how design thinking can help startups and SMEs leverage the right tech solutions for people, planet, and the bottom line. My name is Stevie McGowan, and I'll be chairing today's discussion. When I'm not being coerced to host online discussions, I also lead the team at the Centre for Civic Innovation at Glasgow City Council as my day job. The CCI is a multidisciplinary problem-solving team that uses design, data and innovation to help tackle some of the biggest challenges facing Glasgow's people. We work with teams from across the Glasgow family, academic institutions, the business community, and most importantly, the citizens of Glasgow, to co-design solutions to improve the lives of the people living and working in the city. Our work was recently recognised as one of the top 50 cities in the world for civic innovation by Bloomberg Philanthropies and their recent Global Mayors Challenge. I'm delighted to be joined today by three fantastic panellists who will be sharing some brilliant insight with you on how design thinking can be a game changer for your business, for solving problems and developing truly innovative solutions. Firstly, we've got Lynne Martin, who is the Design for Business Strategic Lead at the V&A Dundee. Lynne has a background in business support for Scotland's creative economies and has witnessed firsthand the transformational effect design thinking can have on communities, businesses, and individuals. It's her mission to make design thinking and its benefits accessible to everyone committed to solving problems and driving positive change through their organisation or business. Hi Lynne, it's great to have you along. Next, we have the brilliant Katie Murrie, lead consultant at the Service Design Academy. Katie graduated in law from the University of Dundee, then completed a Masters in Leadership and Innovation, where she discovered her love for service design. Katie was the first in Scotland to achieve the Service Design Network accredited Master Trainer and has extensive experience facilitating major service design programmes with clients from a wide variety of public, private and third sector organisations. Hi Katie, and thanks for joining us today. And last but not least, we're joined by Elaine Baxter, who's the founder of Boutique Innovation. Elaine is an innovation specialist, passionate about bringing physical and digital innovation to life. She sets a clear vision, creates opportunities, and drives teams to achieve unexpected results. An accomplished practitioner of user-centred design in industry, she's delivered across all stages of the innovation cycle, from process engineering and manufacturing to leading large industry, university collaborations on new technologies. Elaine successfully established and ran the first innovation accelerator at Procter & Gamble luxury division, and again at Coty, driving innovation at pace for some of the world's biggest brands. Hi Elaine, it's great to have you with us too. Okay. Now, we're pretty tight for time today, and I'm keen to get as much of your knowledge out there for our attendees as possible. So let's jump straight to our first question. I'll come to you first, Elaine. So this year's Can Do Summit is focused on how people power combined with the right tech and sustainable and inclusive business practices can accelerate the digital transformation journey for startups and SMEs. How might design thinking contribute to that journey?
Hi, Stevie. So thanks for having me along today. Well, I think it's safe to say that design thinking has a role to sit at the core of accelerating innovation and digital transformation journeys, because it starts and finishes with the end user. So for some of us, the consumer or the customer, you might like to call them. And I would say that, design thinking is also called human-centered design, specifically because it keeps that end user central to the whole design process. So when we focus specifically on the needs and the wants of the end user, then the likelihood of a successful outcome is higher. So in the design thinking process, the initial step is framing the problem statement correctly. So knowing the problem that we're trying to solve is really, really critical. And sometimes this takes a bit of time to get right. But from there, we go out and we do the right field research, speaking to those people who are critical for us to understand. And that leads us to those user-led insights, as we like to call them, that ultimately help us to prototype, design, test, and launch the right product. So I think what design thinking does well is to provide a framework for teams to help them take a stepwise approach to creating that optimized end solution.
Brilliant. And Lynne, what about your experience? What value can design thinking add to startups and SMEs in your opinion?
Well, just to build on what Elaine said there around providing those frameworks, it also gives SMEs and the founders of them a space to think logically about what it is that they're doing in their business. Particularly for small startups, it can be spun out of a passion which is great. But when you have a passion about something, you come with a lot of assumptions. You bring a lot of that to the table. So you might start to build a business around an assumption that isn't quite what the market is looking for. So the design thinking frameworks allow you to test those assumptions, to really get under the skin of what your customers are looking for, and to see how you can improve what you'd initially thought you might offer for the people who are ultimately going to be buying it. So there's that element of just that, giving them a headspace to do that. But if you get design thinking in at the start of an SME, like really get our founders in Scotland thinking about what design thinking can do, it builds a culture of innovation and of openness and of testing assumptions and being uncomfortable and being comfortable with ambiguity. And I think that's a really strong feature of design thinking. Yes, it's the frameworks, but it's also the culture that those frameworks can engender if they're used properly.
Absolutely. Excellent. Okay, finally coming to you, Katie, then. For our attendees listening today, why design thinking?
Yeah, and again, building on what Elaine and Lynne have already said, it gives you that opportunity to really start expanding your thought process when you go into organising businesses and looking at problem solving. Not only does it give you a process, not only does it give you a culture, but it also gives you a mindset flip. And I think that that's really, really important for people when they are so deep into their own ideas or into their own problems. It allows you to take that step back. It gives you a process to work through, but it also gives you that mindset flip where we're going, okay, let's not jump to the solution here. Let's take the time to understand the problem or understand the opportunity before you go straight into doing something. And I think that building on that culture and mindset allows you the opportunity to get support from out with. And not often do we in organisations say, okay, we need support from somebody else or someplace else. But it gives you that mindset to think that we can't always do everything ourselves. We can't be the experts of everything. So it allows us to reach out to co-design solutions much, much better.
Great, thanks for that, Katie. So coming to you now, Lynne. Can you give us an example of how SMEs you've worked with have implemented design thinking to enable tech or digital transformation?
Yeah, so because I'm here representing V&A in my past life where I've been mostly involved with design thinking has been in the creative sector, I'm going to use a case study that I wasn't present for that the V&A have worked with. So there's a company called WL Core that is it's a world-leading polymer firm. And Pete from there came to us with a very technical problem around a piece of fabric that needed changing because it was going to go into space. And what I don't know about all of that can fill a warehouse. So I cannot possibly speak to the technical advancements that were made in the workshop. But what I can do is let you know that Pete came with that problem and he brought in one of his engineers with him. And they worked through the design thinking accelerator process. And they solved the problem. They developed something that worked for what it was that they were looking for. But wider than that, and this speaks to my earlier point, and this is a drum that I will just keep on banging, is that if you come to design thinking with a technical issue, yes, if you've got the right people in the room, you can move through those frameworks and you can solve that problem. But what that does is this problem solving acts as a wider catalyst for a different way of thinking and a different culture. So yes, you can use design thinking to innovate and to solve those technical problems, but it's a means to an end to actually really see what design thinking can do in and around developing a culture of innovation in an organisation. And I know that that's something that Pete has been able to do when he moved back into working with Gore. So it works for technical problems, and it works for kind of exploiting new opportunities in a space, but it also works for that cultural element, and getting design thinking into an organisation means that more people can start thinking that way to solve those problems faster, to be quicker, to be more innovative moving forward.
Excellent. And I know Pete as well, what a guy, absolute top design guy. So Katie, could you maybe give us a wee example of a challenge that you faced or an organisation's faced and how design thinking enabled them to find the correct solution?
Absolutely. And today I wanted to share with our attendees a case study that's recently just happened at the Service Design Academy. So at the Service Design Academy, we use design thinking methodology, but we couple that with service design and using data to be able to drive innovation. And the case study I'm going to share with you is a local company called Gillis, which is a furniture group here in Dundee and further afield in Scotland. During the pandemic, they saw the need to reinvent their digital approach to selling furniture. They had a brilliant experience, customer experience when you came into the store, but that ability went completely out of the window when everything was shut down in the world. So they wanted to take the opportunity to be able to change that onto an online platform to really start selling in the best space that they could online. And design thinking gave them the opportunity to start thinking about how they would develop their website, how they would develop that customer experience online. But ultimately, it actually gave them an opportunity to collaborate with each other. So there were people that had been working within the stores in different departments across the country, not communicating with each other and having no consistency across the way that they were working. So not only did design thinking give them the opportunity in that space, as Lynne said, to start thinking about business a little bit differently, it also helped them to develop their website into a customer experience that really mimicked what was happening in store. You know, really being able to give them that opportunity to put what they were good at into an online space. So that for them was absolutely invaluable. And today I'll give you a link to one of our Valued Voices case studies so that you can see from their own perspective how design thinking helped them to be able to achieve their end technical goals.
Brilliant, excellent, Kay, thanks for that. So wrapping up this wee area, Elaine, where have you seen design thinking make an impact, particularly around digital transformation?
Yeah, so I think we've heard some really interesting case studies, both from Casey and from Lynne already. And I mean, I'm able to kind of add to that with a very diverse kind of range of examples. You know, I work for a lot of different corporate groups, and I've worked for a lot of different teams over the last few years in many different sectors. And I would say that they're each trying to make different interventions on their own digital journey. So I've helped clients in the construction sector to look at new digital strategies. I've helped clients in the education sector to consider new digital propositions for delivery of content. And most recently, I've worked with a US-based healthcare company doing the field research for them on patient journey mapping to understand how their digital and physical interventions could create an improved patient experience for their customers and clients. So you can see that in that case, you know, design thinking is really taking a central role in many, many different areas. And can be really used across that physical digital divide. And I've seen that happen many times and work really well in practice.
Fantastic. I think even just the examples you guys are given show just exactly how wide design thinking can be used. It's so useful. And for me, really is about that mindset that you've touched on. I suppose keep staying with you, Elaine, then looking at that sort of mindset and the conditions that you need to have in place for design thinking. What do you think they are specifically in order for a design thinking led project to be successful?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. And I love how both Lynne and Casey have touched on this kind of cultural piece and the culture of innovation that kind of comes with design thinking. I think the reality is that culture often develops as people engage with the process. So people don't necessarily need to have that culture to start, but they need to have the mindset, the willingness to want to get there. So I think that's really probably the first thing. I think there are a couple of other things that can help design thinking to be successful. I mean, I touched on earlier this part around starting with the right problem to solve, or in design thinking, as we know, the design challenge. So I would say it's not critical that it's 100% right initially, but kind of as the project goes on, the more and more information that starts to come in, it kind of helps you to understand and better define the problem that you're trying to solve. So that's really important, getting that right. I think the second piece for me that's really critical is investing the right time in the field research up front. So ensuring that you've done like the right landscaping assessments, that might be desk-based research, the right qualitative assessment, so interviewing people, you know, walking a day in the life, that kind of thing. And I think it's really important to get that right with your target audience to ensure that you're getting to those crucial human-centered insights, that they're the bits that really help you to then design the right products. And I think kind of as we jump to the end of the process, kind of towards prototyping and test phases, a combination of design thinking with what the lean startup model then, so you have this very kind of low risk kind of build, test, learn environment that works really, really well. To kind of treating this phase as what I would call test to learn rather than test to validate. So you're learning all the time rather than trying to create something perfect, spending as little money as possible at that early stage, but gathering lots of data to support decision making. That's really helpful in those final stages. of the overall product or service design.
I see everyone nodding every time you said something there. I'll come to you, Katie, probably not even with a specific question. I don't know if you maybe want to just build on what we're saying here.
Yeah, I mean, I was nodding away when you were saying test and learn, because I ultimately think that people go through the design process and they think it's some sort of magic solution to figure out what these problems are, but actually it's a really difficult journey. And what designers are doing is not an easy job, particularly with the amount of data, amount of insights that often come from projects like this. But having the conditions in place, I think that from my perspective, from a facilitator perspective, when I'm going into organisations, when I'm trying to share knowledge to allow them to build the capacity themselves to continue working like this, I think that there's a lot of things that you need to be aware of, in the fact that you're not going to be able to please everybody, but you're going to be able to identify who your tribe is. And this tribe word comes out a lot within design, because we feel like we're this really powerful community that can come together, that can make change happen. But it's acknowledging that you're not going to be able to win everybody over, that you need to get your influencers, you need to have the right people in the room. And that's something that happens throughout the process as well. You're always going to come up against naysayers, but actually they make the process much more valuable, because you're already considering the conditions that might make that thing unsuccessful on delivery. So it is about risk reduction. It's about pooling all of your resources together. And like I say, making that community to make things happen, doing it together. I think that that's really, really important, is that co-design element of design thinking.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think for me, it's that culture of how you make people feel safe in the space, because people who don't understand design thinking, or think they don't understand design thinking, can be quite against it. I suppose, Lynne, building on that again, and that culture element in relation to design thinking, what would your advice be on what you could maybe do there?
It's really, I mean, you know, Katie and I have just covered it beautifully. I think when we're in a space where we're facilitating this kind of thinking, creating a culture of safety is really, really important. And it can be as simple as, here are just the ways that we ask you to approach these problems. And if you have an objection, or if you think, wait a minute, this isn't going to work, just take a moment and check yourself. Like, there's a lot of internal conversations happening. Anytime you see people doing design thinking, what you see is post-its and paper on the walls, or a mural board if we're online. But the internal work that people are doing while they're moving through that process is actually really hefty. They're not just thinking about the topic at hand. They're not just thinking about the thing that they need to improve, the element of a technical aspect they need to innovate on. They're analysing their responses to it and moving through that all the time. I think as facilitators, being mindful of that, asking people to check in on themselves, is a really healthy way to create an environment where people feel safe to feel an objection, to voice it, and then are open enough to have a discussion around it as well. I think that's a really important aspect that people don't see. That's the kind of invisible part of design thinking. It's the much more human, individualistic element that helps us get together as a group to do all those amazing things that Katie and Elaine were talking about.
Brilliant. So I think we're all agreed design thinking is the future, and designers should be paid a lot more. I would definitely be an advocate of that. But I think we're hearing all this is amazing. It's, you know, let's all use design thinking. But what are the challenges? What are the barriers to working in this way? What is difficult about it? I'm going to come to you, Katie, because you are Mrs. Positive. So let's see how you do with a negative question.
I think the challenges for me are, like I said, you're not always going to be able to please everybody. And I think that acknowledgement that you need to be able to work with the people who are willing to work with you to make change is quite a difficult one to do. And although we're speaking about design thinking as a process, as a mindset, as a culture, and we're saying that it's not easy, it's also not rocket science. Right? And if you can bring people on that journey with you, then you're going to break down a lot of those barriers initially by actually asking people to come along with you. Just starting that conversation and giving them, like Lynne said, the space to be able to explore that. But for me, ultimately, the challenges are that people don't like change. Okay, yeah, they don't. And often organizations will come to us and say, oh, we want to make change and we want to do innovative things. And then when we get going, they go, oh, we don't want to do that, or we don't want to try that. So it's, for me, getting over those challenges of people not wanting to let go and maybe having a personal, oh, I need to hold on to this. This is my job. This is what I do. It's about identifying really clearly what your objectives are with innovation. Let's not just innovate for innovate's sake. Okay, we need to be able to identify that there's a real need and then work with that. Once you've got those clear objectives and you can articulate that in a way that brings people on that journey, and that's the element of storytelling that's really important to design thinking, is being able to connect with those people that you need to connect with to bring them on that journey. So for me, it's being able to tell people how to be able to contribute and get that story really right at the start, so that you're not putting boundaries and barriers in place before you've even started innovation. So having clear objectives, having your tribe or your supporters, your influencers are going to help you to be able to overcome barriers as you go into this and the challenges as you go into this.
Okay. Good start. I think I'm going to come to you, Elaine, and I'm maybe going to try and push a wee bit deeper here, looking at maybe a time where it hasn't been quite working. What can go wrong, and what do you do when it does?
I think a really good question. I'm going to build on what Casey's just said there, because I think for me, in some ways, getting quite specific on it, the biggest risk is around the ideation phase, and in particular the tools that you use. So, use tools like brainstorming, which everyone's been in a brainstorming session. We've all done one of those, but they really lend themselves to, the extroverts in the room, the shoutiest people in the room. And that can be half of the population of that room a lot of the time, most of the time. And so we want to make sure that all of the teams members are contributing to the ideas, but that's not always the case. So I think what I try and do with my clients is to use other teams that enable, or other tools that enable their teams to contribute together. So finding a way to allow everyone to have their say, and that's really crucial in terms of what I try and do with people. I think the other thing is, and Katie really touched on this, around kind of ideating around old ideas, sticking to the status quo means no breakthrough ever happens. And so it's really, really important to start to break out of those old routines and to come up with really new ideas. And there are lots of ways. There are loads of resources out there to help you to do this and to help with breaking that cycle. And I think, energizing teams and challenging them to come up with new endpoints is really important. And that's the role of a really strong facilitator. And it's one of the things that, I know other people reach out to external partners to help them with, so people like Casey and Lynne, because they need someone in that room who will help to pull the best out of them at that kind of really difficult phase in design thinking, to really challenge them to get to new outcomes, break the status quo, not go back to the old ways of working and doing and thinking. Not as easy as it looks, but there are ways, there are methods, and there are people who can help you to do that.
And finally, coming across to you, Lynne, building on the answers that guys have given, what are the issues that we need to look out for around design thinking, and how do we mitigate for these?
We just need to be careful around how we actually present the tools that we use, because they're so powerful. They're incredibly powerful things, and you wouldn't reckon that a bit of paper and a few post-its and a couple of Sharpies could change an entire course of a business, but it really can. And I think as practitioners, and I speak like I am one, I'm not a practitioner. I run the Design for Business program. I see the value in design. I absolutely advocate for it, but I'm not a practitioner yet. And a really good example of that, actually, I was putting together a set list for a wee gig, and I put loads of songs together and I clustered the data, and I thought, this is amazing. I've got all of this stuff and it's on my wall. I've got post-its and I put it up on like 10. And then I went to the restaurant I was playing in and I had to blow the entire thing out of the water because I hadn't thought about the end user. I'd thought, I've got some cool information and I'm going to cluster it using this tool, but the overall wraparound and user experience had not been considered, and I had to think completely on the hoof. And that's a really tiny, minute example of how design thinking can go wrong. Because if a team had got together and clustered data and information and acted on that and had not considered the user experience, that can be a very expensive mistake. So we need to be careful that when we take people through these processes, that we show them not only how to use the tools and when to use the tools, but to think of the broader context in which to use them. And that is a lesson I will never, ever forget, because I lived that moment of, oh no, I didn't do my user research. And often that's, you know, we make mistakes and that's when the learnings stick. And as practitioners and as people who advocate for design thinking, we can help people not get to that point. And I think it's really important that we don't just disseminate tools willy-nilly. We have to be really careful about how we coach people as after they've been with us through design thinking sessions, to make sure that that type of mistake doesn't happen in a wider context for a business. So yeah, being careful with what we've got, because it's very, very powerful, and it can be powerful in the wrong direction if you don't do that research. And I think that takes it back really well to Elaine's first point. It's got to be centered in research. It's all about the user, not just have some body data clustered on post-its.
Absolutely. I think one of the other key things about design thinking for me, building on that one, is about that prototyping phase. It's about fast, quick iteration, do stuff and learn from it quickly. It's particularly the stuff that we are doing at a city level. Very often we roll out systems citywide, put all our budgets in, all our staff's allocated, and then you realise actually this isn't quite right, but it's very difficult to then change it. So again, there's lots that we can bring there. Okay, anyway, I shouldn't be speaking. So we're rapidly coming to the end of our session. So I'm going to finish with one quick question for all three of you. If any of our attendees are thinking of embracing design thinking in their organisation, can you give us your absolute top tip for success? And we'll come to Katie first.
Yeah, I think it actually builds on the answer that Lynne just gave there, is that you need to be aware of your data, aware of your insights, aware of the things that are going on, and really take the time to do your user research and to feel uncomfortable in that space when you're gathering all those insights, because it might not be particularly something that you want to hear that you're going to find out in that space. But if you actually take the time to let it sink in and think it through, there's an opportunity within each piece of data that you're going to explore throughout this process. So for me, it's often organisations will say, we don't have time to do user research, we need a solution. And I'll say, you don't have time not to do user research. That is the most important thing. And quoting a famous service designer that contributed to this book in the background, Adam St. John once, if you're going to do one thing in design, let it be research.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Lynne, what's your top tip?
Be open. Be so open to what it can do for your organisation. Try not to, although you're going to come with a problem to solve or an opportunity to take advantage of, be open to what the entire process can do for the organisation. And not only that, but for the people who are actually going through the design process. Colleagues will get to know each other better because they'll get to understand how each other think. People will be able to be more open and have better discussions based on the tools that they're going to bring back into the organisation. Be completely open to the possibility that design thinking can change not only a part of what your organisation does, but how it operates. And you don't have to boil the ocean with it. It doesn't have to happen all at once, but looking at design thinking as a way to solve a problem or take advantage of an opportunity is just the start for what it can do for you. So jump in, the water's great, but bear in mind what Katie said and also what Elaine is about to say, I'm sure.
Amazing. And over to you, Elaine. Finishes up.
I would say, you know, an absolutely awesome discussion. I would say, as a practitioner, don't let the framework be a straitjacket. Let it be a guide to help you through the process, because it's an awesome methodology, but don't let it kind of suffocate you. I would say, if I had to give you one piece of advice, the most important thing to do is to know your end user inside out. Really getting under their skin and keeping them at the heart of everything that you do will benefit you enormously in the end. So interview as many people as you can, walk a day in the life with them, spend some time in their shoes, go visit them in their workplace or their home or whatever it is. Absolutely get to know them. That's the critical thing. And that kind of brings me around to the very first thing I said at the start of this session today, which I think has been reiterated by both Lynne and Katie as well.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, I cannot believe it, but we're actually at the end of our time already. This has been a brilliant discussion so far. I'd just like to thank everybody on the panel for joining us so far, and everyone who's attending the Can Do Festival for joining us as well. Thank you so much. And we'd now like to open up for questions.